Hi, my name is Ruby, and I'm a cannibal. Well, sometimes I'm a cannibal. In the daytime, I run a quaint little tea shop, but every full moon after midnight, the hunger for human flesh begins to grow inside of me. It's taken me years to figure out how to stop it. And unfortunately, I've left scores of victims in my wake. When I change, however, I done a different physical appearance every time. This is how I've managed to avoid several life sentences. The key to curbing my hunger is a strange one. On the night of a full moon, exactly at midnight, I have to be standing on the central landing of my house's staircase. Otherwise, my body will rearrange itself to look like someone else's, and at least one victim is always bound to succumb to my ravenous teeth. I realized how to stop my affliction purely by coincidence, or maybe by luck. Either way, one night, at night on which I knew the moon was full, I didn't sleep. I was kept awake like I was on most full moon nights, haunted by the deaths I had caused in the past, anticipating the bloodshed of the coming hours. I tossed and turned for a while, and eventually I decided to go downstairs and see if I have a late night snack. Might help to distract my growling stomach. I usually fasted on full moons. I tiptoed down the first stairs and checked my watch. 11:59. As I stepped onto the landing just above where the second set of stairs turns the corner, the time changed to 12 o'clock. I paused, waiting for that special kind of hunger to hit. My stomach growled, but it growled for a midnight bowl of cereal instead of raw people meat. I stared at my watch and I put my hand on my stomach, but still nothing happened. And then the time changed to 12:01. I blinked and shook myself out of my trance. Then I dared to step off the landing and onto the next step down. I continued to the bottom, and instead of sprinting out the front door with saliva dripping down the chin of some face that wasn't my own, I turned into the kitchen and took out a bowl and a spoon. The sugar from the cereal kept me up for a few hours, but the regular old food was enough to please my belly. I marveled at the new phenomena, and at last I fell asleep dreaming of ice cream and cake instead of severed limbs and disbodied eyeballs. After that night, I always made sure to set an alarm so that I could make it to the landing by midnight. Everything was working out just fine, until I came home one day to see a flyer posted on my door. Eviction notice, it read. My heart skipped a beat. I was terrified but not surprised. I had failed to pay my full rent for 3 months in a row, and I was already late for this month. The tea shop could hardly support me anymore. And having taken a bite out of my mother at a young age and subsequently being put up for adoption, I had no family to fall back on. I panicked for a while and tried to figure out how I could get some money together quickly, but I came up with nothing. I prepared for the worst. Fast forward a few days, I arrived home to see my stuff out on the curb. This was it. My house wasn't mine anymore, and neither was the special landing in the staircase. I grabbed what I could and took to the streets. It wasn't something I was entirely unfamiliar with given my rocky childhood, but it wasn't something I embraced either. The first few nights weren't so bad. Actually, I snuck into the gym of showers, and I was able to run into work and pretend like everything was normal. Then I lost the business too. and I had nothing. A couple weeks passed, and things got harder and worse. My former house had a demolition notice hanging in the same spot where the eviction notice had been. I was begging for spare change in the daytime and trying not to get murdered in the night. The day of the incident, I had stolen a pack of beer from some other passed out drunk and allowed myself to get sloshed in my misery back on my corner where I slept. The world was spinning just enough to take my mind off the pain when the aforementioned drunk stumbled upon me. "You took my shit, you stupid bitch," he slurred loudly. "You're too late to get it back," I slurred right back, ending my sentence with a hiccup. "I'll take what I came for," he growled. Then he clamped his fingers around my small wrist and yanked me to my feet. I nearly fell down, but I managed to keep my balance. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I'll buy you another pack as soon as I can afford it." His grip tightened. I knew I should have been nervous, but the thought only registered very distantly in my mind. "Quiet," he said, grumbling under his breath. Then he began to drag me out of the tunnel beneath the overpass and into the surrounding woods. I kicked and yelled as best as I could, which wasn't very well at all. I'm a lightweight, and I was really hammered. Plus, it really hurt to struggle. My drunk brain thought that it was better to just go along with him. I'm not going to describe what happened to me in the woods. I'm sure you can imagine it yourself. Unfortunately, most women on the street, and a lot of women in general, are prone to being victims of such terrible sexual violence that is described it would make me sick to my stomach, and I eat people, so that's saying something. When he was done, he zipped up his stained pants and lumbered off back the way he came. I was too drunk and exhausted to find my way back, so I ended up just passing out on the forest floor naked, with tears running down my bruised face. In the morning, I put on my tattered, now torn clothes and eventually stumbled upon the main road. I didn't bother going to the police. To them, I was just another piece of scum tarnishing their otherwise pristine streets. A week went by, and every night I was haunted by nightmares of the blurred memories of his face, his fingers, his breath, his hands on my skin. Thinking about it made me nauseous, but I had bigger things to worry about in my near future. I walked past my house that week. There were a dozen people on what used to be my front lawn, but no bulldozers yet. I needed to find a way to sneak in that night. It was to be the night of the full moon. I wasn't sure what I was going to do once it was gone. There were workers there during the day, but at night, I might be able to sleep in without being noticed. I left the demolition site and waited out for the rest of the day, anxiously in my tunnel. I regretted using my pitied change for black tea because the caffeine only made me more jittery. It had been enough hours since the sun had gone down, so I started off towards the house. I walked through the empty streets and looked up at the large round yellow moon hanging in the sky full of stars. For a moment, I admired its natural beauty, but then I remembered the violence that it foreshadowed for me. Instead, I paid attention to the sounds around me and the distant honks of car horns, the breeze whooshing past my ears, the echo of my footsteps. It wasn't until I was just around the corner from the house that I noticed there were two sets of footsteps. I whipped around and saw a tall figure standing in the shadows, maybe 30 yards behind me. "Hi again, you dumb bitch," he called out. He wasn't close enough that I could see his face or smell his breath, but I would recognize that beer gut and slimy voice anywhere. It was him. With a shaky voice, I replied, I thought you said I was a stupid bitch. Now you're saying I'm a dumb bitch. Got me all confused. Which one am I? Sometimes, when I panic, I cope by being a smartass. It was not helpful in this case. You're both, he concluded. Then he rushed me. I sprinted into the opposite direction. But unfortunately, the guy seemed stone cold sober tonight and full of focused rage. He came directly at me and was on top of me in no time. This time, he didn't bother dragging me anywhere to start tearing off my clothes and punching me in the jaw and eye sockets. This time I screamed, but no one was around to hear me. If there was, they didn't offer any help. Quiet, he yelled, contradicting his own command. He held me down and I clenched my teeth and stared at the moon. Suddenly, a strange calm washed over me. He looked at me strangely as I had stopped struggling. That moment was my chance to take advantage of his vulnerability. I kneed him hard in the balls, and as his hands flew to his crotch, my hands was freed, and I punched him in the throat. He toppled over as his other hand went to his throat. This was my opportunity to get up and run away. Instead, I pounced on top of him and slashed my fingernails across his eye. The eyeball turned bright red with blood, and his face seeped the dark liquid as well. Then I stood and wrenched his hand out and under my foot. It listened to the satisfied crunch of his finger bones under my feet as I ground my dirty shoe forcefully into his hand. He screamed and tried to grab me with his other hand. As he reached for me, I caught his wrist and chomped off one finger at a time. I spit out each finger after biting them off and forced them down his throat. His face struggled to breathe, but I clamped my teeth down on his carotid and jerked my head back and forth violently, flinging blood everywhere. The limp artery hung loose in my jaw, and I slurped it up like a noodle. Then I sipped at the water fountain of blood that had sprung from his neck. He tried to scream to fight his finger gag, and I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Quiet." Then I bite off his lips and chewed on them, the way I used to chew gummy worms on ice cream sundaes. He was growing very pale very fast. But before he bled out, I chewed off one last appendage. Yes, the one you're thinking of. And I jammed it somewhere where it didn't belong. Then I watched the life drain from his eyes, and everything was silent. I stared at him for a few minutes. Then I looked at the blood on my hands and their chipped, dirty nails, and realized I was staring at my hands. My hands. I was me and not someone else. I checked my watch, 11:45. It wasn't even midnight yet. In shock, I fled the scene and ran the rest of the way to the house. I would have been too late anyways. The building was already destroyed. I've been on the run ever since I committed my first voluntary murder in my own skin. Since that night and the many full moons that have passed, I have never had the craving of human flesh again. I'm not sure if it was the destruction of the house that broke the curse, or if I needed to murder someone of my own accord all along. But either way, I'm glad both things happened. I've been able to start my life over somewhere else, a place I will not name. And though I've struggled the whole way, I have finally built a life for myself that makes me happy. I run a much more successful cafe where I live now, We serve all sorts of teas and coffees and baked goods. I'm really proud of this establishment, and I'm glad that something good could come from something so awful. So, if you ever find me, which I doubt you ever will, come on by the tea shop and pop in for drinks, or maybe even a bite.